Okay, ZBA, we are recording. We are live. Phone lines are open. You are good to go.
Good timing, Rick. Good evening and welcome to the Town of East Hampton Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for April 19, 2022. We'll get going right away. We have two canceled hearings this afternoon. One is Sherry Berg at 11 Wood Edge Circle in Amagansett, and the other is John Anton at 66 Cross Highway in Amagansett. So we'll go right to our first scheduled public hearing. And that is Nicholas Greco at 117 Bayview Avenue in Amagansett, Suffolk Tax Map number 300-084-01-03.1. The applicant is Nicholas Greco. Size and location is 20,223 square feet at 117 Bay Avenue, Hollymere, number 316, lots 44 to 52 in Amagansett. The description is the placement of between 4 to 10 cubic yards of sand over an existing sandbag seawall on a parcel of land containing barrier dunes, beaches, tidal and freshwater wetlands, and tidal surface waters. A natural resources special permit pursuant to 255-420 of the Town Code and any other relief necessary. Zoning district is A, residence, AE flood zone, elevation 10, and the secret class is type 2. And council, do we have a proper affidavit of service and posting?
Yes, we do. We have an affidavit of service and posting reflecting that both were done. Well, service was done on April 7th, 2022, and the posting was done on April 8th, 2022, and the paperwork appears to be in order.
Thank you. I think Member Branneman will be doing the report this evening.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I visited the property on Monday morning, and it was properly noticed. In fact, it was noticed twice here, which I would describe as kind of the end of Bay Avenue. And then if we advance to the next photo, you'll see that they've also posted a notice on the gate leading into the to the home. That's the home pictured in the background. Next photo. So now I've just turned, I'm at the end of Bay Avenue. This is now the pathway that leads out to the water. And so I just followed that pathway. And next photo, please, Brian. And this is at the end. I took this photo for two reasons. You can't really get the perspective here, but there is quite a dramatic fall off from where we are here to down to the beach level. You'll see that in a minute when I get down there. I also took it because I think within the TAM, there's been reference to the thought that there may be more than one row of these sandbags, and that is in fact the top of one that you can see in the photo here. So next photo, please, Brian. Okay, so now I'm looking at the east. This is the Ruru property. And continuation, as we know, there's one continuous run of these sandbags that go from the Greco property across the common area and then over to the neighboring property. Next photo. So now I've just turned the opposite direction, and this is the subject property. And so one of the questions I have is, in fact, has the work already been completed here? Because it does look like we have sand and beach grass planted here on top of the sandbag. So we'll be interested in how that response is. Next photo. So I'm calling them sandbags. They're geocubes. And so this is, I've gone out onto the beach now. This is the Greco home in a distance, and you can see the existing conditions now from the beach side. And then I think I have one last photo, Brian. So now I've walked over to the corner of the property, and this is the return, looking back up the side of the home. And that's it for my report.
Thank you. I believe we have Rick, you representing the applicant. Good evening, Rick.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Richard Whalen, attorney from Whalen Filer, PO Box 2759, Onondaga, New York. Represent the applicants, who are Nicholas Greco and Diana Heinz, husband and wife, owners of the property, through a trust, I believe. So the application itself is pretty simple, straightforward. Member Brenneman just gave you an overview of what's there today. There has been no work commenced pursuant to this permit in advance of this hearing. Any sand that you see is left over from past sand depositions on the geocubes.
How many past sand depositions have there been?
I don't know the answer. I believe probably one, because the applicants were cited for placing sand on top of the geocubes by the town, which brings us here, even though our position would be that we are entitled to do that and required to do it under the DEC permit for the sand, for the geocubes. So the total deposition will be, the total amount of sand to be placed will be between 4 and 10 cubic yards. It will be placed on top of the existing geocubes and around there, just inland of that area. The purpose of the application, pretty straightforward. It's to comply with the DEC permit that required that the geocubes be kept covered with sand, and also secondarily to avoid continued deterioration of the geocubes, because the geocubes themselves degrade over time, primarily due to ultraviolet radiation from sunlight, and we're trying to prolong their life as long as we need to. So the background to this, and I think it's important to understand the history of the property. So Nicholas's father, also Nick, acquired this property in around 1975 or 1976. He obtained a building permit to build this house that's still there today in 1978. The house was built at that time. Nick always reminds me that he helped his father build it, and it has remained substantially unchanged since that time. The house is 2 stories in part, 1 story in part, around 1,600 square feet. At the time it was built, and I've measured this multiple times myself on the Suffolk County GIS maps, but at the time the house was built, well, actually, I shouldn't even say that. The house was built in 1978. As of 1984, 5 or 6 years later, the setback from the inner edge of the beach, or from the low dune or a bluff line, whichever you choose to call it, to the seaward side of the house or the deck, was 165 or 166 feet. That was in 1984. Even today, on a lot of more than 2 acres in size, the town's required bay setback from a coastal structure, meaning either a dune or bluff crest, is 150 feet. So when the applicant's father built the house, he was what one would expect to be a decent setback from the coastline. And if you actually look, I'm not saying that they necessarily did this, but if you were to look back on aerials to 1962, 22 years earlier than the 1984 aerial, the amount of erosion was basically negligible, very, very slight in that area. Since the late 1990s or around 2000, the rate of erosion has jumped to about 6 feet a year, which precipitated all the activity that you're dealing with today. The geocubes, our proposal to move the house landward, our proposal to put in a rock revetment. All this is the result of the last 2 decades or so of surprisingly and unusually rapid erosion, for which I personally do not have an explanation. Maybe Aaron does, but I puzzles the hell out of me. So my point of making this is the individual, Nick's father, who originally built the house, was not acting precipitously in locating the house where he did. He had what by all normal accounts would be a very substantial setback from the bay at that time, but circumstances have shown that erosion can accelerate, and it did in this area. The most recent events are that in 2018, in anticipation of having to move the house back, and with the house and the deck at that point being very close to the edge of the bluff or Dunecrest, the applicant applied for geocubes, got a building permit to install the geocubes. That building permit was issued on or about July 3rd, 2018, which, if the dates that I have are correct, was the same date on which the DEC issued a permit for the geocubes itself. We are aware that the permit for the geocubes expired in or about April of 2019. We know that the geocubes are there beyond their allowed lifetime. They're there because they're needed to preserve the house. We made an application to move the house landward. That was denied by the zoning board in October of 2019. I'm not going to relitigate the denial, but the board at that time, some members were on the board, some were not, felt that the new proposed house was too large. That seems to be the main reason for the denial. So that application has been resubmitted. At the time, it did not include a revetment. It does now. And the proposed new house is roughly the same size as the existing house. And that application is, as far as we know, now complete. And I would presume would be coming before you for a public hearing sometime in the near future. So that's the background to the application. We're complying with our DEC permit. We're doing something that under normal circumstances would not even have required a public hearing. It's essentially a coastal restoration project, placing sand on or on top of or near a natural feature, coastal feature. So we would ask for the board's approval of the application. One other thing too, if you do approve it, we don't want to have to come back again. We would prefer, the way I will put it to you is, either that future depositions, and hopefully they're not going to be very long, because again, you're going to have a hearing soon on a scaled down relocated house. Hopefully that is approvable. If that's moved back and other aspects of that application approved, the geocubes will go away. It's our intention, obviously, to remove them. And just to anticipate other further questions, it is our intention to open up the road too. I mean, the proposed revetment would include a return on the northeast side of our property. Northeast, yes, northeast side of the Greco-Hines property. So it's not the intention of the applicant to keep Bayview Avenue closed. But at the moment, we need to have the geocubes there to protect the house. If they're removed, the house will not last very long. So that's those are my comments.
Can I just ask you to clarify exactly what it is that you're proposing to do? It was a little unclear whether or not you're putting sand on top of the geocubes, landward, seaward. So could you just clarify that?
It's the first two. They'll be on top of the geocubes. The geocubes, as you saw, is a fairly narrow line. So some of that sand is going to be on the landward side. We're not proposing to put anything in front because evidence has shown it's just going to wash away rapidly. We won't even have an opportunity to plant it with beach grass, and it will be gone. So on top and behind the geocubes is where the sand will go.
And you mentioned that your purpose was to comply with the DEC regulations. Is that consistent with the DEC regulations?
I believe that it is. I know the planning department memo has a slightly different take on it. I'll let the planning department speak to that, but our position would be that this is what we can do and are obligated to do to comply with the DEC.
Do you have a letter from the DE saying that's sufficient?
No, only their original permit approval.
But their original permit says if any part of that wall is exposed, it's supposed to be brought in sand immediately, right? Isn't that the terminology?
I believe it says immediately.
My question is, if there was, in 4 years, if there was only one time that sand was brought in, what time was that? And what time, what date was that sand brought in? And in 4 years, I think that we've had, probably more exposure. That wall's been exposed.
Yeah, I obviously
years. So I think you're not in compliance at all with the permits, either by the DEC or the town of East Hampton.
Well, as to the DEC's permit, that's up to the DEC to determine whether or not we're in compliance. They have not taken any action against it to say that we're not in compliance. So, I mean, at this point, we know that what we're proposing to do here either brings us into compliance with that permit or brings us into closer compliance with that permit. Right now, we're not in compliance, and right now the town is actually preventing us from putting sand on the geocubes as the DEC permit required. As to the timing of the prior depositions of sand, I don't have the dates. Presumably somebody on our side does. I don't know exactly when sand was placed in the past. I don't go down to the property.
I'm just having a hard time with the statement that town's preventing you from doing that, because in 4 years, only one time has been attempted to put sand on there. So, I mean, if there is an emergency, there's been no attempt to adhere to the DEC then requirements in the way you're perceiving it.
Let me clarify 2 points.
So you're coming to us for an emergency procedure and saying that the town's prohibiting you, but I think that the applicant has not adhered to an emergency declaration, if you will, to begin with.
First of all, I don't agree that we're here on an emergency basis. Shoreline state restoration is allowed at any time. So we're here because we have an uncovered sand geocubes and we want to cover it. In terms of prior depositions, number one, I don't know how long the original sand placement lasted. We know the duration habitually along the beach is not long, but I do not know how long the original sand placed with the geocubes lasted. That's number one. I don't know. Secondly, I'm aware of one prior sand placement on top of the geocubes. That's the one for which the town cited us. And so when I say the town is preventing us, we put sand on top of the geocubes in our position in compliance with the DEC permit. The town says you can't do that on your own. You need to come back and see the zoning board every time you put sand on top of the geocubes, notwithstanding that we have a 5-year DEC permit that says we're supposed to keep it covered. So I don't know whether there was sand placement before the last time. I do know there's been at least once, and the town said you can't do that without our permit. So hence our application to you that's being heard tonight.
And do you know the date that the first sand deposition was done?
I don't.
Because you testified that the solar, the UVs can break down the bags, and I'd be curious how long they have been exposed. It's just, something's not adding up to me.
Well, the geocubes were put in 2018. I know they were put in not long after the permits were issued. So we're now a little less than 4 years out. I don't know how much of the time,
and if you're not
the
covering,
sandbags have been covered.
if you're not covering the fronts of the bags, how is that saving the bags from breaking down further from UV breakdown?
To a certain extent, they are subject.
Sense, Rick. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, I think it does help to cover at least part of the bags, even if you're not covering the front. Front's obviously on the north side, so it's got less solar exposure. But apart from that, we're supposed to, under the DEC permit, put sand here. Now, if you're arguing that we're not putting enough sand and that we should put sand in front as well, then you're free to tell us that.
Wouldn't you think if the wording of the DEC permit is to say place sand immediately, that is to protect the geocubes from breaking down? So your interpretation of the DEC requirements for sand might be wrong?
The DEC permits, I'm sure, are written by lawyers. Well, lawyers are going to use the term immediately because they don't want to leave any leeway.
That's an assumption.
No one actually expects that you're going to put sand down the day after the last grains disappear from the top. So, I mean, the word immediately means with some promptitude, haste, not necessarily.
But as far as I'm aware, those geocubes have been exposed for a lot longer, for almost the entire duration of this. I see those things all the time.
As far as I know, the seaward side's been exposed for a long time. Again, I'm not down there on a regular basis, so I can't speak from my personal knowledge as to how long they've been exposed.
Anybody else, any questions?
Well, just to pick up a little bit on what the chair has just said, and that is that I visited the site, and I think it is important to cover the geocubes, probably for the long term, keeping them for as long as they possibly can survive under the natural lifespan of the material. But I'm agreeing with the chair here in that the entire face is exposed, and when you visit the site, you wonder exactly what we're achieving by adding a little bit of sand at the top. Additionally, the geocubes that are at the end of the lane, which are not particularly well covered, the tops of those are deteriorating. There are some fairly gaping holes in those at this time. So the entire project seems to be in danger to me, just because there is most of the entire length of the geocubes, the northern face is exposed, and a good amount of the geocubes that are not on necessarily the property that you're representing here are also exposed. So the logic of bringing in the 10 yards works for dressing up just the top of what's in front of your particular residence.
Well, I have heard, again, I haven't gone down to look myself. I've heard from my client that, in fact, there are portions of the geocubes now that have begun to break down. The idea here is that these geocubes, we hope, are not going to be here for that much longer. We have an application to move the house back, and I don't want to prejudge the outcome of the application, but it's scaled back in accordance with the 2019 decision by the board denying the prior relocation. So I would hope that the new approval, the new relocation will be approved. So the plan is to remove the geocubes, and the sooner the better.
The 4 to 10 yards of sand, can you explain how much that is going to, how much is that going to protect? Because that's a long structure. I think 4 to 10.
Yeah, I don't know how I have to.
I don't understand what.
I don't know how that figure was arrived at, so I'd have to defer to other people here tonight. I should point out, in addition to my clients, we also have Aram Tertunian from First Coastal, and he or Nick may be able to answer some of those questions that I don't have answers to.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, well,
Okay, thank you.
Well, yeah, I have a question. In the TAM, it says that no sand covers proposed for the road right of way.
That's correct. We're not proposing to put anything further in the Bayview Avenue right of way.
But that will remain there as is for now.
Yes.
I guess Brian. You have anybody else to come forward, or?
Mr. Greco would like to speak.
How are you, Mr. Greco?
I am okay.
Are you
Thank
an
you.
attorney?
I am not.
Okay, will you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I think I could provide some clarity around many of the questions that were just raised. So one of the first issues that you raised was whether or not what we are proposing is consistent with the DEC permit requirements. I would submit that we are attempting to comply with those permit requirements as best we can. The TAM that you have before you notes that all the sand placement that went in 2018 and on the seaward side of the geocubes was not effectively washed away, but was completely washed away before the end of 2018. In similar public hearings, I think you've heard Brian talk about sand placement along the beach on Mulford Lane and as unsustainable, and that's exactly what we've experienced. The seaward side of our geocubes cannot sustain sand placement. It is continually swept either east or west, but does not ever stay in place. And as a testament to that, we have included in our full application at least 3 different consultants who say sand placement cannot be maintained at this site. I only add that as an aside to substantiate that.
Can I just ask a quick question? What is the purpose coming forward now? It's been 4 years, so why now? What's your motivation today to suddenly want to cover the top of these?
In the spring of 2021, so this was another question, when was the first or other sand placements made? The only other time that I placed sand on top of the geocubes was spring of 2021, when over the winter of 20 to 21, we went through several severe storms, the spray of which from the bay washed all the sand off. And I'm going to step away from the microphone just point off of this apron in front of the geocubes. So I just pointed to the apron in front of the geocubes. That's the area where the sand was washed away during those winter storms. Brian has a picture in some of his documentation. It's the document entitled Existing Conditions, has a photograph standing west, looking east of that western section fully exposed. There's filter fabric on top of the geocubes right now. But what happens is, as the wave action hits the geocubes, washes up over, the water pools there, it actually washes the sand off, and it also makes the sand percolate down behind the geocubes and out from underneath them. So what the effective result is the photograph that you have seen that was taken recently in the middle of the roadway. You see large gaps between the bags. So not only does the top of the bag, is the top of the bag subject to UV light, but also it creates voids and it undermines the installation. The installation really should be the bags, sand fully behind it, and without cover on top, rainwater overspray from the bay leaches behind and starts washing the sand out from underneath. So I think that's, so you asked, why is this happening now? Well, the winter 20 to 21 was the first time the sand on top of the cubes had been fully swept away. And as Rick stated earlier, I attempted to comply the best I could with my DE permit, and I placed sand back on top of the geocubes. That's when I received the summons. That is the only time sand has been placed on the geocubes, on top or in front. In front's never been done because it is unsustainable. There was a second question about the amount of cubic yards. I think the chair raised that question. The installation that I did in the spring of 21 was 5 cubic yards, and that was just enough to cover what had been washed away at that point in time. So our permit is asking between 4 and 10 because it's subject to the actual conditions at the time. Now, as they exist today, it probably needs 1 to 2. But knowing that the permit is good for a period of time, I suspect that I'm going to have to replace 1 to 2 this year, and perhaps next year up to 10. I don't know. Depends on the severity of the northeasters. Somebody raised the question about whether or not we're asking to put sand in the roadway. I wish we could. I want to, because the tops of these bags, when they split open, they will not stay contained. So everybody understands that the road is a private road. It is a common right of way. I don't own it. None of the homeowners own it individually. I would love to place sand on top of those cubes to keep the tops of the bags covered, as the DEC permit requires us to do or asks us to do. But as I've been told, I don't own it. I know I don't own it, but people in the government here have said you can't apply for it, so we did not. But I would love to do it.
Why did you put bags there if you don't own it?
It was done as part of an overall installation to protect the 2 properties. I could speak only to my own, but that was a piece of engineering that was necessary to properly protect the properties.
So isn't that inconsistent?
I don't know whether it's inconsistent or not, but I know that it's protecting my property. But we are talking here to talk about sand placement. We're not talking about here to talk about the geocubes themselves. So I'm trying to address all the issues of why I would like to cover the tops of the bags with sand. So they don't degrade, so they stay stable, and the helms are protected, and it's permit compliance to the best of my ability. Be happy to answer any other questions if you have them for me.
Any other questions?
Nope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rick, you good?
Someone else?
Brian?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, board members. Brian Frank, Chief Environmental Analyst from the East Hampton Town Planning Department.
Brian, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
So I have an oblique aerial image of the Greco property on the screen. And for those of you that may not be familiar with the area, which probably isn't very many at this point, Greco is the property on the right. That's the western of the 2. The property on the left is under the ownership of Ruru LLC. And this board has seen numerous applications from both of these properties in recent years. And I have spent a lot of time as an environmental professional at these properties and at this area in general since at least 2010, probably earlier. I helped both Mr. Greco Sr. and Steve Grabowski, the former owner of the Ruru property, relocate their sanitary systems off the beach after the nor'easters in 2010 in December. That's when I began spending a lot of, or when I first spent any extensive time professionally on these two properties. We know that these houses are built in a filled marsh. So this is in a big wetland area. The planning department has delineated the wetlands in this area, not only for these two properties, but for other property owners further south. So for a variety of reasons, the planning department has had a number of professional occasions to visit these properties. Both of these properties have also had different non-structural restoration permits issued to the prior owners in previous years. So there's been a lot of professional observation of these properties by either myself or my colleagues in the planning department for some time. As Rick had mentioned, this geocube seawall was installed in the summer of 2018. And as Mr. Greco had mentioned, the original sand cover that was placed over them washed away no later than the end of the year. I had visited the property and have photographs in January of 2019, and all of the sand was removed from the seaward face of the geocubes. Since that time, I have not seen or been made aware of any effort to really fully meet the condition of the DEC permit for this structure. And just for convenience sake, I'm going to speak of it as one structure. Both permits, by the way, for individually issued, have similar language about keeping them covered. I reviewed the application that Rick spoke about earlier for the redevelopment of the property back in 2019. I'm reviewing the application that is pending before the board. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We're here to discuss this application this evening, but I don't mind telling you, to be clear, as I've discussed with Mr. Greco, with Maddie Narvillis from Rick's office, with Andrew Strong from Rick's office, before the application was even submitted, there are still significant concerns about that pending application. So that'll be the subject of an environmental review and a hearing before this board, and that's probably the proper forum to vet those issues and those questions and for the board to evaluate the application. But if the intent is to leave the geocubes there until there's a permit to effectually replace them, that may not be in the near future. And I just want to be clear about that in the issue of full transparency. You can take a look at the plans that are in the file. The file is in there. You recently received an at-scale last month, a set of at-scale building plans. That was the last remaining item. The application is complete. It'll be in the queue to write up and get in the hearing queue, and the assessment will be there for the owner, his representatives, the board, members of the public, other involved agencies, anybody who's interested. And that's kind of all I want to say about that for the time being. This application does nothing, substantively nothing, to comply with the DEC permit. If I take one step to the west, I'm technically getting closer to New York City, but I'm still pretty far away from it. And I think that's an accurate comparison with this application. And I just want to read you what the language of the permit condition that we're talking about is verbatim. I can bring it up on the screen. I don't know that that's really necessary, but there are a number of issues in terms of compliance here. First of all, condition 15, verbatim, this is what the application is purported to comply with, states, if the substructure, in parentheses, e.g. geotextile cubes as shown on the approved plans of the reconstructed dune becomes exposed at any time, the permittee shall cover the structure with upland sand of a compatible grain size within 30 days of discovering the exposure. If the permittee fails to comply with these requirements, the structure shall be removed by April 15th. I think we've established that these structures have basically been exposed since at least January 2019. Placing sand on the very top is a convenience for the homeowner, but it does very little to satisfy the permit condition. My belief, and I believe these permits are written by the permit department, not attorneys, but that's a minor point. My understanding, my understanding is that this permit condition is like other erosion control structures. the addition of sand is intended ideally to help keep the structure be shore neutral, to keep the adverse impacts from occurring that we know occur from erosion control structures. And in 4 years of observing this structure, we're seeing most of those impacts in here. Has this structure resulted in a loss of public access? I would say that it has. Has it resulted in adverse impacts to the protected natural features? You can see the wetland, especially to the west here. This is where wave action is deflecting off it and depositing sand in it. Remember, these houses are built in a hollow, in a hole. If you have the topography from the town's GIS in your file on another photo, the elevations on either side of where the fill is for these two homes is about 2 feet above sea level. So I recognize that there may be an acceleration of erosion in the past 20 years, but this is in a natural hollow. This never had a substantial natural high elevation or a well-developed barrier dune that I have ever seen documented in older photographs or aerials. So it's those low areas on either side of it are always going to be prone to inundation. You can see some of the debris deposited in the wetlands here from, probably from Mulford Lane to the east. But this isn't the only permit condition here that's relevant. There's also a permit condition that requires, I was reminded recently that the restored dune or bluff shall be stabilized with snow fencing placed at the seaward toe of the dune immediately upon completion of the fill. The snow fencing has been placed on top almost as a safety fence because it is essentially from the top of those geocubes, a 6-foot drop down to the beach. Lastly, I want to point out, and I do think this is important, permit condition 22, which says conformance with plans. All activities authorized by this permit must be in strict conformance with the approved plans submitted by the applicant or applicant's agents as part of the permit application. And then it references the first coastal plans. Those first coastal plans show a single row of sand cubes, not two. It seems pretty obvious. In the road right of way, there are two. I believe from that exposure in last year, I believe there are 2 rows on Greco's property. It's my opinion, based on what I have seen of these other structures, at least one of them on Cranberry Hole Road, that they're installed as, 2 deep, not a single row high. So if the applicant hasn't followed the approved plans and they're not meeting multiple permit conditions, then I don't really see placing 4 to 10 yards on top of this structure as any meaningful measurement to comply with the DEC permits. And I'm going to remind you respectfully that you're here to determine if this is eligible for a natural resources special permit, and you're being asked to allow the maintenance of a structure that has been expired for more than 3 years. An application that, a structure that in its application included a removal plan, and that's part of the file, and that was part of the building permit, and that's part of the town code that authorizes the use of these geotextiles, that as a condition for getting a building permit, there's going to be a removal plan. And I can bring it up on the screen, but I don't know that it's in much debate that it's necessary that First Coastal did prepare a removal plan that specifically stated on it that the cubes were going to be removed in 6 months, 9 months if it received an extension, the beds were going to be opened up, and the sand was going to be spread out, and the beach was going to be restored. That was built into the permit. So this permit was issued with the knowledge that this is an interim activity for a maximum duration of 9 months. Not interim until you get another permit that you're satisfied with, and I'm going to leave it at that you're satisfied with, but a maximum duration of 9 months. It was intended to be a short-term emergency activity. That is the code provision, the code chapter that this falls under is emergency activities. It wasn't built with a natural resources special permit. So I'm a little bit puzzled by the idea that the zoning board somehow has to authorize, issue a natural resources special permit to maintain a structure that it never issued a permit for in the first place. So I think this application is rife with problems, to put it concisely. And I hope I've articulated that. And I don't know how this is eligible for a natural resources special permit, or how, again, it moves to substantively comply with the DEC permit. And I agree that you probably can't keep sand in front of these things. That's been testified by Aram in previous hearings, in Mr. Greco's narrative that he submitted in his pending application, and just some of the photos that have been submitted in the file of the structure interacting with the shoreline. But that's why the town code is explicit about this is really very short term, very emergency. Keep a structure from becoming completely damaged until a better plan is developed. And that plan really needs to be developed and be ready to implement at the end of the duration of that permit. That's the purpose of this code section, not to be there for 4 years and say, well, we're hoping to get an approval for the board for something that we want to do. And if we get that approval, then we're going to remove this 3 years expired structure. I'd like to make myself available to any questions that any of the members have.
Questions for Brian?
I'm okay.
Thank you.
I do think we have some folks here from the
Do you
public.
want to hear the public first, or you want to address? All right, do we have anybody from the public here? Mr. Karpinski? Or you?
I'm good, Chairman. Before I do get sworn in, I was wondering
Oh, go ahead.
if, is it all right if I put my phone on to record what I'm going to speak of tonight? Because we've had already 2 instances in the past where Bayview Avenue, the magical minutes have been lost, and also the video from LTV is non-existent. So do you mind if I put my phone on while I speak?
I will address council on that.
You are being recorded right now. I don't think it's appropriate for you to have a recording device in here.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, then
Okay.
on with the show.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I didn't even state my name. Joe Karpinski, from the oldest home-owning family on Bayview Avenue.
Your address also, Joe, please.
14.
14.
Second home on the right. Thank you, board. Thank you for having a hearing. Out of curiosity, once again, the 4 to 10 cubic yards that they want to dump over, that would not be sufficient considering the fact that their original plans in the DEC permit that they submitted clearly states that they were going to put 1,000 cubic yards over these cubes. The DEC permit on number 15 clearly states that if it's exposed for 30 days, which they've been exposed since October of 2018, that they should be covered within a 30-day period or face immediate removal. I will tell you that the DEC is aware. I have spoken to Darlene DeFabio before, Laura Starr, and Kevin Kispert. That being said, 4 to 10 yards won't do anything. The structure he did build on top of that wall, that was done 3 days after Ann Glennon sent a letter on April 24th, 2019 and said, remove the bags in the roadway immediately. 3 days later is when Nick Greco Jr., 2019, April 27th, built the structure that there's now. Brian Frank just alluded to number 12 in the DEC permit. They were supposed to put that fence in tow. He's built a permanent structure, in my opinion, with the wood around it and on top. That is an inflexible addition to a fluid structure. So that shouldn't be there at all, and that also null and voids his DEC permit. It's funny that they're coming here to ask you guys for sand when they used to go to the trustees for all the years prior. In fact, Rick Whalen was the trustee attorney the last time the Greco family went to ask for sand to be put in front of their home in 2017. That being said, when we came to the meeting on June 4th, 2019, all I asked for was for my roadway to be opened. I was unaware at the time that Ann Glennon had already sent the letter for the roadway to be opened immediately. The next week, you guys received the Zoning Board of Appeals on June 11th, 2019. You got a letter from Aram Chajuzian stating that, hey, I have to open up the roadway. We should modify the plans. They know they've taken the roadway. You've heard it tonight from both of them. It's the road. Once you built past your property line into the right of way, blocking the road, emergency access, the second illegal row behind the first that's been exposed. That was a Christmas present in 2020. That got exposed on Christmas Eve, December 24th. So that's not the first instance we've seen of First Coastal doing work and putting second rows behind the first that they're not permitted to do. We came here on September 17th and November 19th, 2019. At that time, Ann Glennon came to you and told you she had sent the letter. Following that, Rick Whalen said, what should we do? Take out every bag? we could just reapply the next day. At this point, since my roadway has been blocked since 2018 to 2022, a road that I could use up until the age of 34, and now I am 39, I still cannot use it. My children have never used their road to this day and never been on their damn beach. Pardon my language, I apologize. That being said, the town permit, the DEC permit both state if there's any violations that it should be removed by April 15th. They had their removal plan. They have not done anything to do this and take it out of the road. That being said, also at that meeting on November 19, 2019, Nick Greco Jr., and all the stuff I'm stating should be indelible since it is on the videos that you guys do have. Nick Greco Jr. did state these aren't his bags. Well, 2018, these were their bags. In 2019, they're not their bags, and now they have a modification for the bags. So one day they're their bags, one day they're not their bags. I will also, in December of 2019, Rick Whalen was quoted in the paper when speaking of his Trails Preservation Society and talking about an area that they used for over 20 years. Well, this is something I've used my entire life. But to quote Rick Whalen, it's getting to be annoying. Enough is enough. Well, we certainly feel the same way. I would think that this would be done. In July 7th of 2020, Ann Glennon sent a second letter to immediately remove the bags from the road. I can tell you the town of East Hampton was also served letters of enforcement from several of the homeowners in 2020 as well. In 2020, May of 2020, that's when Darlene DeFabio told me that she had been to the site when I finally got in touch with her after 2 years of trying. And she told me that she'd been in between the properties. I said, oh, you were in the middle of the road. I was met with the most blissful 12 seconds of silence of my life. I was told her superiors would call me back since now we know of the violation in the road being blocked. Well, magically, I've never been told back by Darlene DeFabio or any of her superiors. We'll also want to say that under urban renewal and any modifications that would be done to an urban renewal road, that actually should have been a public hearing in front of the town board under Town Code 232, 1-60, Section D. That has never happened. There is no resolution. These homeowners did not do that. The town board has said that they were not aware that the road was blocked. Now, of course, they have implied that they certainly know that it's been blocked now. I also will let you know that on the night of January 12th, 2022, now Nick Greco Jr. and Rick Whalen have decided to go in front of the Planning Review Board to ask to have the road abandoned, and they can reclaim 10 feet of the road. Now, I can tell you the Planning Review Board said no to that. Back in July of 2021, Vinnie Gordiello, the town consultant acting as town engineer, also told them no. I will tell you that when Nick Greco Jr. tried to put sand over this structure that he has now, the date was March 20th, 2021. This is a picture. Can I submit pictures as we go along? Yes or no? Oh, okay. That's 2021. This is a tax map of the road. This was before the cubes. This was my birthday present in 2020. You can clearly see Bayview Avenue going down the center to the middle. Also, with them trying to reclaim the road, I would let you know that I have made the Amagansett Fire Department's Board of Fire Commissioners aware that the road still remains blocked to this day and emergency access. That has been used in previous years. This is 30 feet of the road being blocked by their cubes. I put it there. You can also see, since they say nobody ever uses the road anymore, well, First Coastal certainly said in their plans they would use it as construction access. Here's their own picture. All you had to do was Google First Coastal, Bayview Avenue, July 2018. Well, here it is. Here's the roadway. There's their excavator on the other side of Stella McCartney's property. So this is absolutely amazing. Here's the second row behind the first. You guys already alluded to that, you know, but yes, the bags in the middle of the road are falling apart. They are endangering my family. If you went down and hopped down on the beach, whether it's still there to this day, but it certainly was there in August 2021, here's a PL that's clearly would be delineated as, I would believe, property line, so not their property. This is my beach being destroyed. This was August of 2021. You can see all the sand that's been flushed away. And guess what? This beach needs to be remediated back to 2018 levels. Now, of course, I won't begrudge Nick for trying to protect his home. I understand what he wants to do. But when they violated our rights by stealing our road and the right of way to every homeowner, landowner on this road, every visitor, every renter, this cannot be anymore. They've already been sent letters of immediate removal. What is immediate at this point? It's to face immediate removal. At this point, everybody is made aware. Even in regards to contacting the DEC, we asked for help from Assemblyman Fred Thiel, and he certainly contacted the DEC on our behalf back in 2020. I've also asked for him tonight to listen to this meeting. I've asked for Senator Palumbo to listen to this meeting at this point, and I've certainly asked our district attorney to listen to this meeting at this point. Whether they all do or not, I do not know. I'd also like to give to you guys this document from Aram Chichouzian dated 1987, so you can see the destruction that would happen if these cubes would be there. Let's also remember Aram Chichouzian has told you several times piping plovers are an issue. I will tell you in that July 7th, 2020 letter that Ann Glennon sent, that they let them know piping plovers are not an issue here, so please stop using that as an excuse. Guys, time is up. My road needs to be open, and I want it to be opened immediately at this point. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Board. You want to swear me in?
No, state your name and address first.
Kevin McAllister, I'm founder of Defend H2O, Sag Harbor base. I reside at 26 Indian Wells.
Great, Kevin, do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Thank you for the time. I've been before the board several times. I've addressed this structure in the past, as well as other proposed structures further to the west along Cranberry Hole. By way of my background, my training is in coastal zone management, specifically in coastal processes. Have over a decade of direct experience in shoreline management in South Florida, so I'm well versed to speak to the subject. With respect to town code, going back roughly 20 years ago, I certainly contributed to the development of coastal management policy that you know is before you today, with respect to geotubes, armoring within the various zones that were designated within town shorelines. I'm very pleased because I for a moment sitting there, I guess I was at a loss. I was glad to hear Brian basically clarify that, in fact, this structure installed roughly 4 years ago it was installed as a temporary emergency basis. So sitting here, I was thinking, my gosh, this has been already memorialized. And, gladly that's not the case. And I would remind you of that fact that, again, consistent with town code, this is a temporary structure. And I know it's been prolonged with respect to its removal, but let's not lose sight of that fact. With respect to the sand placement, this is purely cosmetics. That's all this volume of sand is. Just so ultimately the tops of the bags are not visible. And as Brian described with DEC policy and intent, the intent is to keep a volume of sand in front of these structures, semi-hard structure, the geotextiles, whether it be tubes or cubes in this case, ultimately keep them out of play because of the adverse impacts to the fronting beach, namely loss of that beach, skeletal erosion, and I will stress the impacts to the public trust, which is the right of passage in front of these structures. And, that probably is in question depending on certain storm events. We're losing sight, almost, we seem to be responding, treating the symptom as opposed to treating the ill here. And I say that with respect to inlet management, further in Napeague. If you look at the aerial photos that the county has, and I know Mr. Whalen cited those, if you go back in time, that inlet was to the east. It was a very robust beach. Clearly, there are changes with climate change, sea level rise, but the rate of erosion I would attribute to the influence of that inlet with a deep channel and the jetting of sand offshore and inshore. So there is having an adverse effect on the sand train coming from east to west through that area. That's a larger issue that really needs to be explored because, again, systematically, if we're not mindful, property by property through this area is going to be armored. And geotextiles are every bit the same as rock, in my opinion. And I was a bit taken back by Mr. Whalen's comment that in the future with the application that is coming forward with the home rebuild, that the intent is to replace the geotextiles with stone. So now we are truly permanentizing a hard structure in this area. The public access in this area with the right of way. I mean, again, that is, that is the fabric of certainly of this community, East Hampton. It's beaches, it's walkable beaches, and it's access ways to get to that shoreline. And this has been taken away from the public, and you must not lose sight of that. So I ask you, by virtue of this sand, please don't memorialize the structure by ultimately authorizing the cosmetics, the placement of sand. This is meaningless. It truly is meaningless. And I think by what the applicant's asking, by virtue of this board, if you take this action, are you going further to accept as a permanent structure the geotextiles? Again, going back to town code that were installed on a temporary emergency basis. So let's not lose sight of that. I know there's obviously a process that has to play out here. Could be legal, administratively, but it's really important that you stick to the code. You don't lose sight of that. We don't again accept the structure as is, and certainly not allow it to morph into boulders out front. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Kevin. Anybody else from the public?
Good evening. My name is Darrell Glennon from Lazy Point.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
I was up the road on, I'm just going to give a little backdrop on this. And this gentleman here was just up, actually hit the nose on the head for the area. Part of the problem is not looking at the history and everything of Lazy Point. Okay, so yes, he is trying to save his house. I live just up the road. I was the last road before these two houses until recently when it's all built up. Moved out in the fall of 2016 we had a sell and I moved over down the ways in Lazy Point. The problem you have is that the town dredged in '87, made a minor inlet, a major inlet, caused the natural northeastern inlet to shut down. Predators came on to Hicks Island, destroyed the terns and the piping plovers that used to nest there. And this is all cause. This is very much cause of actions that were taken back then. I believe the follow-up dredging of that inlet was in '92. That's when things went bonkers down there. I ended up, as I lived there, I had a charter business. We came through there all the time. And what happened was I had a 27-foot Boston whaler that was sitting off on a mooring. We would take a 14-foot aluminum skiff from the beach, go out to the boat with my customers. What I'm getting at is the house that's on the water in Mulford Lane, my parents owned from 70 to 72 for 3 years, and they sold it because they found a better house on the harbor side. My point is, when we were there was never current in the water. Back in 2002, 2003 now, all right, 30 years later, roughly, I'm putting my Boston whaler out there and I'm going through zincs like crazy. And it's not because of electronics, because I'm not even around any of the boats and I only had a radio and minimal stuff. So the whole thing is it's the current. All of a sudden there's a current there already, and that's following the dredging of the harbor. And I need to point this stuff out because you stop taking the bird's eye view. That was one problem at the time the Natural Resources Director, Larry Penny, took when he ended up going for dredging the wrong inlet. He doesn't know about that kind of stuff. Okay, if you see Mulford Lane, I put half that rock on Mulford Lane at the end with permission because we were trying to save the Clanky house and we're trying to save the end of Mulford Lane. Okay, the cause and effect is nobody wants to take responsibility, but the harbor is a mess. The harbor is all shoaled up. And I'm sure it's half these gentlemen's sand. 1981, I worked for Steve DeSuno, who owned the house before the Grabowski, which is his son-in-law, ended up inheriting it. That land was way out. Not only that, is you don't even understand how far those lands are out. The town owned a lot out. Now, at the end of that road where the town lot was and a little bit further, okay, was the fact that it was to be absorbed by whatever. But that's long gone by 200 some odd feet. Okay, so even though this gentleman's trying to do what he did, if he did it while I was still there, I had machines, I would have gone right through that. They should have made returns back up on their own properties. And trust me, I think this name Stella McCartney had something to do with it at the time. Okay, but so regardless of that, it's not going to help nobody do anything. Okay, we used to come through the woods and everything. We know when they built those houses, Steve first, and then Nick a couple of years later. And they butt heads because of the fact that Nick was messing up Steve's road. Okay, and yes, it was wetlands. By no means would anybody be there today. And then the wetlands that still extend to the south, geez, you're not going to, nobody's going to touch that stuff. But the point is I'm neither saying here nor there. It's cause and effect. And even as Brian said, something happened in '87. Yeah, that's the first year they dredged the harbor and opened up the wrong inlet. You guys have a mess down there because of what we've done to it. And actually right now, forget about this. And by the way, I'll probably be gone this fall. I'm going down to Virginia. And you should see how other states will handle erosion. And don't give me sea level rise. Because guess what? I put in wells and stuff like that, and groundwater is at the same level it's been. Okay, if it came up an inch or two, that's one thing. But the point is, this whole town, this whole island needs its own dredge, and start dredging all the material and put it back where it was. Okay, but in the meantime, forget about this. This is peanuts. What's going on, and especially the way that harbor has been destroyed. The eelgrass needed cool water. Nope, that's shut down now. Half the eelgrass is gone. There's another pond of pines that actually is a baby nursery where they try to do their oystering and stuff like that to grow out, and that actually feeds the Nepean Harbor, and harbors are naturally nurseries.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap
Yes,
it up if you can.
that is a wrap up.
Thank
It's
you.
just the fact that, you know what? Stop looking at this. Look at this, because you're destroying it all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else? I don't think there's anybody else from the public. Rick, you want to keep it brief, please?
I will try to, Mr. Chairman. I have to respond to what was said. First of all, the issue before you is whether or not the placement of 4 to 10 cubic yards of sand as proposed meets the natural resources special permit criteria. I don't see how it doesn't. I do appreciate Brian Frank, though, saying that he doesn't think we need a natural resources special permit because the geocubes were not issued through an NRSP. And I guess that sort of justifies how we placed the sand initially. But the town has since changed its position, told us that we did need an NRSP to put new sand on top of the geocubes, and thus we're here. But that's the only issue before you. Brian spent a lot of time talking about compliance with the DEC permit. That's the job of the DEC. It has nothing to do with you. Brian questioned whether the geocubes are 1 row or 2 rows deep. They're 1 row deep. If you want an explanation as to why there's a little confusion about it, I can have Aaron Drachunian speak to that, but he just showed me a photograph showing the installation. The geocubes are 1 row deep. Regarding what Mr. Karpinski said, I'll be honest with you, most of it I don't even understand, and I don't think he understands either. But I will tell you this, that the beach at the end of the road is privately owned. It's owned by the owners on either side. We've never debated that the people on Bayview Avenue should have some means of access to it, not necessarily vehicular access. But one of the things that Mr. Karpinski questioned is whether there was some trustee involvement here. In 1910, I think that was the year, the deed is in the trustee records. The trustees gave a quick claim deed to the then owner of the property that was to be developed as, I forget the name of the subdivision here, but the developer around 1910 got a quick claim deed to the trustees that went from Lazy Point Road to Gardner's Bay. That means to the mean high water line. So there's no trustee involvement in this land at all. Whoever has the waterfront lot owns the beach there. That's really, the issue, as I said, the issue before you is a very simple one. Most of what you just heard from the last 3 speakers has very little to do with the question of whether or not, you have any basis to deny the placement of the sand on top of the geocubes. Seems to me that it's only beneficial. There's no harm to it. There is one other thing I do want to speak to, though, because this does go to the underlying tension that we're seeing between the applicant and the planning department. The language in the code about the temporary placement of geocubes, I wrote that language. That came out of the local waterfront revitalization plan that was done primarily in the 1990s. It extended on into the early 2000s. By the time the LWRP was finished and the code was amended, I was gone. Denise Shern took over what I was doing, but she never basically changed that language. Here's what I want to say about it. The time frame of 6 months for the original permit and 3 months for renewal. I didn't come up with that out of whole cloth. That was obviously the product of some committee discussion, and I don't remember who was on the committee, but I do remember the thinking at the time. The idea was that if there was a big storm and a waterfront property owner of the house suddenly lost 10 or 20 feet right in front of their house and now exposed the house to danger, that they would have a method that they could put in some sort of a temporary barrier while they went and did something. This kind of came out of, there was a project that maybe some of you will remember in Southampton town on Mecox on the ocean in the late 1980s or the early 1990s. And it was the first time we ever heard about geotextile cubes. And somebody put in these things and the ocean came in and actually for a while, they cut off beach access. If you look at that today, by the way, the beach is fine, the geocubes are gone, all the houses are still there except they're a lot larger. But the point is that when the 6 and 3 month periods were chosen, the assumption in the 1990s was that that would be enough time for somebody to go into either move the house back or get ZBA approval for coastal road, a permanent structure. And what we now know is that time is completely inadequate. So that's where the time came from. The assumption at the time the law was first written was that up to 9 months would be enough time for a waterfront property owner to come in and come up with a solution. And we've learned it doesn't work that way. So that's all I have to say. I mean, I think I haven't heard anything to really say why the sand shouldn't be placed here. Most of the other talk is extraneous, and I think you should issue a natural resources special permit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Excuse me. I apologize. I just have to correct the point. Brian Frank again. I have to correct the point on two things because, as Rick had pointed out, he did author a lot of the erosion law and then handed it over to Denise Shern. And I worked closely with Denise Shern in getting those regulations adopted in the LWRP adopted by the Department of State. I've been the principal person who's been the LWRP coordinator since that time. There is nothing in the code, in the language that supports Rick's statement about that time frame being selected because it was enough to move the house back or to get another permit. I will send you, if you're interested, the introductory language of that local law where it says that short-term time frame was developed, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it memorized verbatim, but I'm happy to send it to you in its entirety. That language came in because the presumption is that a structure that is placed in the field for only a short term is less likely to have the adverse environmental impacts of a permanent erosion control structure. There is nothing in there about getting a ZBA permit to move the house back. So maybe that was in some people's discussion. I'm sure there were dozens of committee meetings there. And I don't doubt that came up in some discussions, and some people feel that strongly. But I am going to tell you that is not reflected in the local law, in the introductory language that says, these are the code provisions that we're adopting, and this is why. The last thing I wanted to point out, and I apologize for leaving this out of my initial presentation, this is not a coastal restoration. You have what constitute a coastal restoration is defined in the town code. Again, it came from that same time period, that same legislation. And in paraphrasing it, I have it verbatim on my phone. But it's the placement of natural materials and vegetating it for the purposes of mitigating erosion. It is not placing sand or vegetation on a hard structure. So the idea that this is a coastal restoration is not supported by the town code. The idea that the time frame was based on allowing somebody to move a house back or really to rebuild a new house, because this house would be eligible to be moved back under one of the other emergency activities of the code. The applicant has chosen not to do that. They're entitled to not choose to do that. They're entitled to apply for a new house and to have that application evaluated by this board for the natural resources special permit and variances that it requires. But there is a code provision that allows this house to be moved back without a natural resources special permit under the same code section, the same chapter 255-429 of the town code, that allows the landward relocation of an at-risk structure. And again, I'm paraphrasing. You have this code section in your file from other applications, probably the earlier Greco application and definitely the earlier Ruru application. I'm happy to send you both of them so that you can read them verbatim and don't rely on my often flawed memory and my paraphrasing.
Thank you. Real brief.
Okay.
We got to wrap this up.
I'd like to suggest we need to close the.
Yeah, me too.
I'd like to respond to what Brian just said.
No,
I think
this isn't a contest.
Brian's already doing your rebuttal. How, we're going to rebut all night long?
two comments. First of all, Brian's wrong about the 9. You wouldn't have put in a provision for temporary installation of the shore structure unless it was to give the landowner time to do something. That's obvious. And they chose geocubes because they're not permanent. My second comment is with regard, because this is important. Brian just said we could move the house back right now, presumably with a building permit. There are times when you may be able to move a house back on a relatively wide lot, and you could just do that with a building permit. We have to put in a new septic system, a new driveway. You're going to let us do that without a natural resources special permit? I mean, if that's true, I mean, maybe let us know that. But we clearly need an NRSP to relocate the house, even if we're, whether we're building a new house or moving it back, because there's such ancillary work to be done with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Stop.
2 minutes, less than 2. That's the whole.
I just want to know if you have any callers in.
Are there any callers, Matt?
I was just going to say, for the record, there are 0 callers. Thank you.
So Matt, any glitches in the recording?
Mr. Greco, you can have 2 minutes, providing that nothing you're saying has been addressed before.
It will not be
This has to be
controversial.
new. Otherwise, we're ending this.
Oh, understood. I'd like to correct one statement that was made by Joe earlier, Mr. Karpinski. Neither Rick or myself or my family has ever said that nobody uses the beach. I think that's prejudicial in terms of being out in a public forum. Secondly, this is a great photo that we have on the screen because it is purported to be a representation that the geocubes somehow have something to do with the overwash and the sand in the wetlands. This is the farthest thing from the truth. GIS photos and Google Earth images show many instances before the geocubes were installed, overwash of the dune bluff and also the beach sand in the wetlands, all preceding geocubes. So we shouldn't, all I'm asking is that we should not commingle tonight's discussion was somehow degraded to a discussion about geocubes to one that should be really focused on sand. And everybody can come and say all they want about how what we're asking isn't fully compliant with some statute of the permit. And there's merit to everybody's argument. We can argue all night long, but the truth is we're asking to do the best way we
Mr.
can.
Greco, please, we've already been there. And I just want to make a point here that nothing about this board will be prejudicial. So there's nothing about this process, but this board that will be that, will be that. I just want you to understand.
I appreciate you saying that, but I was only seeking to
Thank you.
correct a factual inaccuracy.
Thank you.
okay, are we ready to
Thank you.
close? In the matter of Nicholas Greco at 117 Bayview Avenue, Amagansett, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-84-1-3.1, I make a motion to close the public hearing and the public record.
I'll second
Are we
it.
closing the record or what Brian?
Closing the record.
Closing the record. Okay.
I concur.
Concur.
I concur. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Our next hearing is Nicholas Nagler at 369 Cranberry Hole Road, Narragansett, Suffolk, tax map number 300-128-01-25. Now, again, the applicant is Nicholas Nagler. Size and location is 33,291 square feet at 369 Cranberry Hole Road, Amagansett. The description is to relocate an existing two-story residence, attached garage, and accessory structure landward, south, and install a new sanitary system on a parcel of land containing barrier, primary dunes, beaches, tidal surface waters, and beach vegetation. The relief sought is a natural resources special permit pursuant to 255-420 of the Town Code and any other relief necessary. The residence is currently located contiguous or partially seaward of the dune crest, and the residence and accessory building and are proposed to be located approximately 50 feet and 117 feet respectively from the primary dune crest. The zoning district, A resident, AE flood zone, elevation 10, and VE flood zone, elevation 12. Secret class is type 2. Council, do we have a proper affidavit of service and posting?
We have an affidavit of service and posting, both reflecting that both the mailing and the posting were done on April 7th of 2022, and this paperwork appears to be in order.
Thank you.
This is mine, Mr. Chairman. I'll take it. Thank you, Brian. This is a photo of the posting that's out on Cranberry Hole Road. Next. Just a second photo. It was damaged in the wind. Next. And maybe some repeats here. Here I'm looking to the east on Cranberry Hole Road, and most of us know what this looks like in this area. Next. Here I'm looking back to the west now, and again, you get a pretty good idea what this section of Cranberry Hole Road looks like. Next. Here I'm looking up the driveway. I'm standing with my back to the road, and I'm looking up the driveway that leads into the Nagler property. Next. That's some indiscriminate photo. Just next. Again, next. These may be slightly out of order. I'm looking across, coming in, looking to the east. We see the nature of, but that's not even anything. Sorry. That's a downloaded photo that's not of the site. Sorry, Brian.
My mistake.
Yeah. There we go. Back to there. That's the walkway. Again, we're back to the roadway coming in. Now we're going a little bit further along, and we can see the house in front of us here. You see the the driveway and the parking pad, and there's another structure just to the right of the driveway that sits to the south of the main house. Next. This is that structure. It's a two-story structure that sits separate of the main house. Next. There's a picture of looking back at this building, and there's not much there. It's self-explanatory. Next, there's a deck around it. Now I'm looking off towards the house here, and in one direction here. I'm standing pretty much to the far western corner of the house and looking back across. There's some vegetation at the end of the one roof line here, but beyond that, you can see that the house extends out. This is a fairly long structure. Next. Here I am. I've moved over a little bit. Now you can see the main portion of the house with its windows facing, and this is all facing southward. The house is facing southward. I'm looking northward. Next. Now I'm standing back up at that house and looking out away from the house back towards the structure. And you get a distance, you see the road in the distance, and there's going to be some of this area. The house will be being moved towards that structure. The proposal is to have the house move towards that structure, move back away from the shoreline. Next. This is an area down going towards the roadway where the septic system, the new sanitary system is proposed to go, which is in the southeast corner of the property. Next. Now I'm going around the building. I've gone to the east and I'm look out and you can see the harbor beyond, and the water beyond. Next. I'm standing here. This is important to note exactly where the water high tide mark is here. where the water comes to. To my right underneath where the staircase finishes up, is a retaining wall. There'll be some other photos of it, but that's in discussion for here. There's the deck, and again, the house stretching out. We're looking west from here. Next. I'm turning around looking east. We see the beach as it stretches out. Many of the structures in here have been in front of the board because several of them have the same erosion problems that are repeated from one structure or another. And we're looking now west out towards the fish factory. Next. Now I've walked around to the west side, and you can see that we're about to step down and come out. Just down to the right corner, there'll be another photo. We see some of the rocks and how there were some rocks that are noted in the TAM and a suggestion that the applicant is willing to have them removed. Those rocks are down in your lower corner. Next. Here I am standing on that deck and looking down just at this rock deposit. Next. Same thing, I'm on the beach now, and I'm looking back, looking at the house, and we can see that this doesn't include the concrete wall, the bulkhead, but it does show that the rocks here that were placed there to help stabilize that portion of the property. Next. I backed off to the west, and I'm looking, and you can see now the bulkhead as it exists, and the deck that we were standing on extends right out to the edge of the bulkhead, and you can see how the water at this point is splashing up against the bulkhead itself. Next. Just looking back down at the character of the beach here. Next. And again, I've now moved to the east side of the property. I'm looking back to the house to my west. And again, we have a deposit of boulders here. These were all noted in the TAM as having been agreed to be removed by the applicant. Next. Now, this is a pretty good shot of what the bulkhead looks like. I've walked down to where I'm further on the sand. This house, when we look at the survey, we notice that, note that it's not sitting parallel to the outside road. And when it gets to the beach, it's the same way. It's set at an angle. So we have a little more beach here. On the far side, we had water hard up against the concrete. Next. Again, looking back now, rocks, house, and bulkhead. Next. This is just looking directly to the east at the neighboring, and we've had a long discussion tonight about geocubes. Here's another location where geocubes are in place. Next. Again, just a repetitive one of the house. Next, Brian. This is only because in this sand, there are some sandbags, not geocube sandbags buried. Maybe hard to see, but there are some ends of sandbags coming out. They were part of an earlier effort to stabilize that dune. Next. And this is just working my way back out to the front of the house. On the west side now, there's a walkway that comes back out to the parking area. Next, sorry. Back across the parking area now, you get an idea for it. Again, the detached structure. Next, I think there's only one more.
I believe that's the last one.
That's the last one, okay. Then thank you, Brian.
Thank you. We have the applicant or the agent. Hi, Drew, how are you?
Hello,
State your name and
my name is Drew Bennett, consulting engineer, doing business at 74 Montauk Highway in East Hampton Village, and I'm here on behalf of the owner, Nicholas Nagler, who wanted to be here this evening but is away. He's out of town on business. So
hey, you want to raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
So this application is purely relocating about 5,500 square foot existing residence landward in an effort to retreat from an eroding shoreline. And in the process of doing that, we are upgrading the sanitary system and reconfiguring the driveway. The photographs are actually quite useful. I don't know if you want to pull up the site plan or the photographs.
I can put up the site
plan would be
whichever
useful
you'd
to
like.
start.
Drew.
Yeah, and I'll try to keep my remarks brief. So the idea is to pull the house back 50 feet.
You have two site plans. If you prefer the other one, just
The
say so.
newer one, I think, is 2021. So in round numbers, we're going to pull the house back 50 feet, put it on a timber file foundation, raise it up slightly so it's FEMA compliant, and reconfigure the driveway as a gravel driveway. It's similar to what's there now, and upgrade the sanitary system. So if you could just show somewhere on there, Brian, thanks, is the comparison of existing and what we're proposing. Can I step up and just kind of walk you through it? Okay. So this site plan is existing. Here's the bulkhead. This is what's proposed. This is the house. You can see that it's oriented like this right now. It's pulled back and oriented more parallel with both the shoreline and the road. And the house location is really a balance between balancing side yard and rear yard setbacks and trying to align with other existing houses in the area so that we're not only protecting the house, but being good neighbors and not being right on the road. So we think we've struck a good balance in that the lot is only so deep and you sort of put it in the middle and it aligns up with the existing newer residences on that stretch. So we have a New York State DEC permit that was issued in July of 2021. I think we heard enough tonight about erosion and the cause of erosion, so I don't see any need to rehash that. There was a discussion, several things were raised by the planning department. One was, which was pointed out in the photographs, that there are some boulders or rocks on each end of the existing bulkhead, and the owners agreed we'll have those removed. And then there was also planning department asked us to consider removing the existing bulkhead, which I'll point out is legally pre-existing, and there is a certificate of occupancy for it. So we've had that discussion with the owner on several occasions, and he feels that the only reason he still has his house is because of that bulkhead, and so we're not proposing to remove it. I was there this afternoon. It's still in serviceable condition. And in fact, I think I looked at it in 2005, when right after Mr. Nagler first bought it, and it's weathered a little bit, but it hasn't changed much. So we've also had a chance to look at the TAM this afternoon, and there's some conditions or proposed conditions if approval is considered, and we'd ask you to approve the application, obviously. And they all look relatively straightforward. I would like the opportunity to review them with Mr. Nagler when he returns, which should be shortly. But I don't see anything in there that's something that we couldn't live with, but I would like the opportunity to just review those.
So you would need the record left open?
Yeah, if you could give us a week or 2 weeks or something like that, is that reasonable?
2 weeks, I think is.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So if we could have that, other than that, it's my opinion that we could comply with those recommendations. I only had one question, and that was there's language in there about recommending covenants and restrictions, and the recommendations or the conditions, the recommended conditions don't really lend themselves to the covenants and restrictions. They're more like conditions that could be inspected and CO'd rather than having covenants and restrictions, something on the deed, but that's something that we could talk about with council if there's something specific that you want to have in a covenant and restriction. For example, beach grass planting, I don't know if that needs to be in a covenant and a restriction. You know, it's something that we would do. It would be inspected, it would be CO'd. But anyway, that was the only question that I had. I did say I keep my remarks brief, so I'm certainly available for any questions.
Do you know when approximately when that bulkhead was built, or when does it show up on the earliest C of O? Does it show up?
Actually, it's discussed in Brian's TAM. I might let him discuss that, but I believe it's late 70s is my best understanding.
Prior to the NRSP standards and
That's correct. My understanding is that's correct.
LWRP. Okay.
And we don't know at that time, because there's no written record as to know how far that bulkhead may have been set from what was the shoreline at that point. Is it always
I could get you that number. I mean, the prior application obviously presented a lot of information that the shoreline was, I would say, 100 to 200 feet seaward of where it is right now. You know, I mean, in the late 70s, they built the bulkhead for a reason. Right, they didn't build it because they liked it aesthetically. So at some point, erosion began to occur on that shoreline. Exactly when, there's some things that have occurred whether it's the fish factory or the inlet or whatever, that have changed on that shoreline where the rate of erosion has turned into sort of a hotspot of erosion. And there's different theories, which I won't get into right now, but.
In terms of the move of the house itself, I'm not sure you're familiar with that, but as a representative, I'd like to ask you, is there a plan been put forward about how the house is to be moved? It's a very long structure. Is it to be moved in pieces, to be moved entirely? And it's going to be lifted because it's coming up to a new elevation. You're going on pilings. So this is a sizable job when you're down there. You realize that this is an undertaking. And the fact is that to get the kind of equipment in there to make that move and the steel that's necessary to rail it over, it's a significant undertaking. So I'm wondering whether or not we have some solid idea about how this was attempted to be done.
So I've been through the entire home, and I've been underneath the home, and I've been on the shoreline, and I can tell you it's a beautiful home and certainly worth saving. So the idea is that so the means and methods of the actual move will come down to once they negotiate with the house mover, but we envision that it'll be moved in one piece. That the house will be lifted, the timber foundation will go in, and it'll go back and be rolled back and set on the timber foundation, and then all the restoration and other work will go around it. So it's possible it'll be moved in two pieces, but I think that's unlikely, just because of the way it's set up inside. It's very wide open inside, so
yeah,
it's it's not a bunch of small rooms. It's very large spaces with large spans and so on and so forth. So we're envisioning it as one piece, lift it, put the timber pile foundation in, roll it back onto the timber piles, and then do the ancillary work around it. So.
Yeah, so as you know, anyone who's been involved in that kind of move, there's a significant amount of work in order to get ready for the actual move. And there'll be some cribbing going on the water side as well as on the landward side. And then steel will be put in place.
We're not envisioning any cribbing or steel on the seaward side of the bulkhead.
You're not?
No.
Not on the seaward side of the bulkhead, on the seaward side of the house, where the deck is.
Yes. Yes.
So
but that would still be landward of the bulkhead itself.
Right.
So.
The other question I have, if no one else has another question, is that the re-veg plan on here, or the landscape plan, will have to be somewhat significant because you're moving the house now 50 feet. By moving it 50 feet, we're going to be removing some vegetation, a lot of mature vegetation there, and a fair variety of vegetation as well. And then the new sanitary system that's going to go in the southeast corner, that's also a well-vegetated area, that'll be removed. The system will go in, and then whatever other work has to happen that's corollary to that, working it back there. So I think that's of interest to all of us to understand exactly what we're going to be looking at as a finished product here.
Sure. My response to that would be, I know it's common that we can work out a revegetation plan with staff, if that's something that the board is agreeable to. I know that the owner is not looking to cut down the vegetation that's there. They're actually looking at transplanting it and putting it back, moving it and putting it in different locations. There's some very beautiful native plantings there that he is very interested in preserving. So,
okay, well, that's encouraging.
I know the house is on pilings.
Will be on pilings.
Will be on pilings. The staging of temporary fill and stuff like that. You want to address that? Excavations and fill, I would say.
Yeah, so there's really not too much excavation except for the sanitary system. So there is a small CMU cellar right now underneath the house. It's 6.5, 7 feet high. It doesn't extend around the entire, it's not under the entire house. It's sort of a third of the house. And so they'll raise the house. They'll have to fill in the cellar hole, so to speak. But other than grading for the driveway and excavation for the sanitary system, there's not a big new foundation excavation, actually. So the quantities of material that will be generated will be quite manageable. Yeah. So, and there's a large driveway area there now. The house actually comes back and sits landward of some of that driveway area. So there's plenty of open areas that are already disturbed that they can lay down material and stockpile soils. And if you had, you have some condition that you want to impose on that, I'm sure we would entertain it. But the quantity of material that'll be generated is very manageable.
And the second building that's on the site will be moved as well.
Yes.
Yeah, but a less distance, not 50 feet.
Yeah, they'll have a new relationship with each other.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions? Anybody else?
I'm good.
Barry?
Yeah, yeah, I think I'm good. Well, about the re-veg and there are a lot of trees there, mature trees, and putting in the septic. You think you'll be able to save most of those trees also?
Mr. Nagler's desire is to transplant them and bring them back.
Transplant?
Ball them up, save as many as we can. The idea is not to destroy them. And then understory or in some of the seaward areas of the house, the town has recommended beach grass, and that's fine. It's what we had in mind. So,
Okay.
Thank you. Brian?
Good evening again, Mr. Chairman, board members. Am I still under oath?
Yes, you're
Okay.
still under oath.
Brian Frank from the Planning Department. This is a pretty exciting application because I'll move to the aerial photos in a moment, but this is the closest structure to the shoreline and has been for a long time on Cranberry Hole Road. And I think the idea of relocation, strategic relocation, a landward relocation is admirable and appropriate given the location of this property. I'll try to answer some of the questions that I've heard come up here. It's interesting when you get used to two larger screens doing everything with one, but you had asked about the age of the bulkhead and the house. The first time the house shows up on the town's aerial photographs is in 1984. The building permit for the house, I believe, was issued in 1975, but on the 1978 aerials, which are even grainier than these, it's still pretty apparent that the lot was vacant. So the permit was issued. The house hasn't been built. This is the first aerial photograph that shows the residents on the property, and you can see that even at the time it was built, it was always pretty close to the shoreline. So it's been asked, why do we use 2001 so often when we're doing our shoreline regression analysis? And that's because you can tell in 84 and the aerials that we have in the 90s, they're grainier, they're blurry, they're pixelated. I just don't have the same level of confidence in comparing where the dune, which is the dune crest line, which is probably right about here. But it's just it's much better starting in 2001 going forward, and I just have a high level of confidence. If I'm going to do anything older than that, I'd like to work with surveys where something is done at a lesser scale, and there's a lot more confidence interval in the measurement. I believe that the bulkhead was built at the time of the residence. There is no separate building permit for it. And given the proximity of the structure to the shoreline, it's really not that surprising. This board looked at this property in 2007 for some minor deck additions, and the planning department issued may have been an expedited natural resources special permit for the bulkhead reconstruction in 2013, and I believe that work was done in 2014. So it's not surprising that the bulkhead is serviceable. It was reconstructed less than 10 years ago. So I'm going to move to a more modern application, a more modern aerial. This is in 2018, and there's not much change in the 2021 aerials, but this is a fair representation of the existing conditions. And I have another aerial that I could show you that shows where the limit of moderate wave action is and the flood zone boundaries are. The house is basically moving from a close to 0-foot wetland setback to about a 55, 60-foot wetland setback, and a negative setback from the dune crest to a 50-foot dune crest setback. The sanitary system is in this location now. It's about 15 feet from mean high, 50 feet from mean high water, and its location in the southeast corner of the property, it'll be located about 120 feet from the shoreline. This is an exciting application because it takes a structure that is clearly at risk, an imperiled structure, and moves it to, while it's not a wholly conforming location, it's certainly a 50-foot setback considering where the house is located now. Is a vast improvement. This it may be worth pointing out that there are only protected natural features in one direction on this property. There's, all the features are to the north, so the southern relocation doesn't bring it closer to any other wetland or anything else that's protected. But this is a very exciting application, and I hope one that is emulated by some of the other more imperiled structures in this area and along the north shore of Amagansett. I am concerned about leaving the bulkhead where it is. It is a legal. Did we just lose audio?
No, you're good.
Was beyond.
Sorry, we're a little shell shocked.
Eleni had me paranoid about after what happened last week. I apologize for the interruption.
Speaking.
I know, it's so weird.
No, it's good.
But I do think you saw, remember Johan's photos were excellent. I don't want to go back and forth from too many photos because I'm a little bit clumsy with just the one screen. I have to get a little bit more dexterous about that, and I promise I will. But it was pretty clear from member Johan's photos that what you see is classic flank erosion and scour erosion, and that's why that stone was added, because you're seeing erosion at the end of the hard structure. That's what's to be expected. That's what we've seen as a result of the interaction of other hard structures with the shoreline over time. Allowing those stones to remain would require a variance from the coastal erosion hazard overlay regulations, and the applicants have chosen to remove that makeshift extension of the coastal erosion structure and bring it back to its legally pre-existing level. And I'm hopeful that the applicant is going to see that moving the house back but leaving the bulkhead here is likely to create some other problems in the future. I think the structure will continue to get flanked, and it is very likely that wave action will get behind the bulkhead and bring the shoreline behind the bulkhead and bring it closer to the new residence, which does risk shortening the new lifespan of the new location, which I'm sure Mr. Nagler doesn't want to do, given the investment in relocating the house. I could understand his reluctance and not wanting to remove a legally pre-existing structure until there are plans to somehow mitigate things. And I'm hopeful that over time there'll be a subsequent application to take a look at that. But the bulkhead was built with the house. It does predate the Natural Resource Special Permit regulations as well as the LWRP. I don't think it would be. I don't think it's a plausible nexus, or even if it is, I think it would kill the project if you said the bulkhead had to get removed to relocate the residents landward. And for that reason, it's hard to do more than emphatically encourage Mr. Bennett and Mr. Nagler to come back with a better solution than leaving it there. With regard to the covenants are usually built into permit conditions that can be undone is the wrong term, but I'm at a loss of something better. So things like maintaining the quartz gravel driveway is usually incorporated as part of the covenants. Maintaining the subsurface drainage structures, the dry wells for roof runoff, is something that gets built into the covenants. And those things, my guess is, Anyway, Drew will discuss that with his client, and we'll see where it goes from there. But that's an example of some of the things that are built into covenants and restrictions. They're filed with the property. They're filed with the county so that a new property owner gets the property and says, hey, wouldn't it be great to get rid of this gravel and replace it with asphalt? They know that there's an issue with that in these areas. And that's why that's incorporated into so many natural resources, special permit conditions, because without that, they could say, geez, I didn't even know that there was any type of condition that required this to be left here. In terms of the revegetation, the application proposes beach grass. There is some nice mature shads and cherries on the property. The applicant is free to, the planning department's recommendation in short is the revegetation should maintain or improve the duneland character that is inherent along Cranberry Hole Road. You can do that with sand and beach grass. You can, some people opt to do that with things that are a little bit more elaborate. Holly, shad, red cedar. It does get a little bit tricky. Any larger specimen trees like that have to be hardened off and adapted to that climate. If you take an American holly that was grown away from the coast and you put it in this environment, from my experience, what I've seen is they burn because of the salt air, the climate, the salt spray. They're just not hardened off to a coastal environment, and they often either die or look pretty miserable, and they're expensive. So that is the recommendation for the revegetation condition, is to maintain the duneland character of Cranberry Hole Road. I think that's everything I have. I have other photos. If you'd like to watch me clumsily bring them up on the screen, I'll do that.
Yeah, I think we have the existing conditions.
I have a lot in there too, including this photo and the one from '84.
Thank you. Any questions for Brian?
I don't know if it's a Brian question, but with the removals of the stone that they've agreed to, that would include those pieces of sandbags that were intermingled with those?
I think it would have to remove all foreign materials from the ends of the bulkhead.
Thank you. Matt, is there anybody in the online on the phone?
0 callers, thank you.
It doesn't appear to be anybody in the public, or would you have your address the board, your party, so I got to give you the opportunity. So thank you. So with that, it looks like we're
Leaving it open for 2 weeks?
Well, the record, it will be open for 2 weeks anyway, so that's good enough for you. No, the record, no, sorry. Leave the record open for 2 weeks.
Is that what we agreed to, council? 2 weeks?
Yeah, that's right.
And then we'll just file a letter with the board saying whatever.
Sure. You can always
So
get-
that we have a comment to whatever.
Right,
So
but
should we
for
just
now, I
state
would
that
make
the
it-
record will be held open till May 2nd? That'll be 2 weeks from tonight?
I'd say keep the written record open.
Written.
Until
Written record,
2
yeah.
weeks from tonight. Public hearing's closed.
Thank you. And then,
Who's on the date?
May 2. Today, I think it's May 2.
The two?
Was it May 3? May 3? May 3rd, yep.
May 3rd, yeah.
May 3rd, sorry. My math was worse than I thought it was. Okay. Mr. Chair? Okay. Then in the matter of Nicholas Nagler, 369 Cranberry Hole Road, Amagansett, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-128-01-25, I'd like to make a motion to close the public time.
Keep going, please.
Johnny.
But to leave the written record open until May 3rd, 2022.
I'll second that.
I'll concur. I concur.
I concur as well. Thank you. Thank you.
What? Playing music back there?
Okay, we're going to move to the work session part of our evening. The first post-hearing decision, I am recused, so I will step out of the room for that. And I will ask my vice chair to take over. You'll read it into the record and then proceed with discussion. Thank you.
Okay. And our first post-hearing decision is for Tourmalet LLC, 250 Old Montauk Highway, Montauk, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-87-3-4. Size and location of the lot is 49,461 square feet. It's located at 250, we've done that already. Description: to demolish existing residential improvements and to construct a 4,252 square foot, two-story residence, swimming pool, and approximately 2,312 square feet of first and second floor terraces, a gazebo, sanitary system with retaining walls, and to allow a portion of a wooden walkway to the beach to remain on a parcel of land containing coastal bluffs and beaches. The relief sought is a natural resources special permit pursuant to Code 255-4-20 and variances from 255-11-10 dimensional regulations of the town code, and any relief necessary. A 1.5 variance is required to allow the residents to extend 26.5 feet above natural grade, where 25 feet is the limit for flat roof structures. All improvements have been proposed more than 125 feet from the toe of the bluff. The zoning district is a resident zone X flood zone. The secret class is type 2. This was my case, so I'll lead off. First hearing for this application was held on October 5th, 2021. At that point, we were working from a survey dated August 24th, 2021. The board was asked to consider issuing an NRSP for the site and to allow a height variance of 1.5 feet to allow the proposed structure to exceed the 25-foot limit for flat roofs in the town of East Hampton. The applicant was represented by Andy Hammer and Joel Halsey at the hearing, and also at the second hearing that took place on January 25th, 2022. Vincent Guardiello spoke on behalf of the Rayner Group, who designed and produced the building protocol that was referenced throughout the hearing. At that first hearing, the board discussed pertinent aspects of the application and reviewed several of the physical peculiarities of the parcel. The board will remember that the property is located on the Old Montauk Highway in Montauk, and that the parcel stretches from the roadway down a precipitous slope all the way to the beach below. The gradient drop is significant, with the northern edge of the property being at 110-foot elevation, and the proposed structure, if approved and constructed, will sit between 85 and 90 feet in elevation. The lot itself is irregularly shaped, being 69.88 feet in width at the roadside and 75.78 feet width at the toe of the bluff, while bulging out to over 170 feet in width in the area of the proposed development. Additionally, along with the irregularly shaped lot, an additional feature of this parcel is that an access driveway that services 242 Old Montauk Highway snakes across the property, entering from the northwest and exiting to the southwest. At the October hearing, many of the points discussed then were referenced again in January, but one that the foreman chair, John Whelan, raised was that the proposed house as drawn lacked proper egress from its lowest level, and that was addressed by the applicant's representatives in a letter and accompanying prints to the board dated October 19th, 2021. At both hearings, construction protocols and particular concerns relating to the impact that the proposed construction might have on 242 Old Montauk Highway and 246 Old Montauk Highway were discussed at length. An earlier construction protocol dated August 31st, 2021 was replaced in January with an updated and enhanced version dated December 21, 2021. Other aspects of the application drew consideration and discussion from the board concerning a proposed scenic easement that would roughly correlate in line with easements that have been previously established on adjoining properties to the east, the eventual disposition of a wood walkway that leads down to the beach but is only partially located on the Tourmalet parcel, and the effectiveness of the sanitary system as currently designed. Concerns related to the sanitary system were answered in comments offered up by Mr. Guardiello at the January hearing. At the second hearing on January 25th, 2022, we were working from a survey dated January 7th, 2022. At this hearing, a detailed discussion of the methods described in the updated building protocol that were offered to stabilize the property at 246 Old Montauk Highway were reviewed, and both Mr. Gardiello and Walter Lorenz of Hobbs Incorporated, the proposed general contractor, described the construction techniques that they plan to employ to guarantee the security and stability of 246 and to prevent the right-of-way drive to 242 from being blocked or seriously damaged. The homeowner at 246 had written to the board expressing their serious concerns relative to the project and called into both hearings. John Tarbett of Tarbett and Lester also wrote on January 28, 2022 on behalf of 246 Old Montauk Highway, and the board considered their comments very carefully. In a project of this scope requiring a complicated demolition and site clearing, in a project of this scope that requires a complicated demolition and site clearing and a massive excavation, great care and respect must be paid to adjoining and collateral properties. On page 17 of the Rayner Group's most recent building protocol in section 2.4.4.2, they estimate that 4,250 yards of fill will be excavated from the site and interior shoring will be required to maintain adjacent contours, especially at the northwest corner of the lot, where 246 Old Montauk Highway sits within 40 feet of the proposed construction. On page 15 of the building protocol in section 2.4.4, it is suggested that two separate support systems will be necessary to proceed with the project in the hope of not causing damage to the neighboring home to the northwest. Utilizing a soldier pile and lagging system similar to the one instituted recently at 184 Old Montauk Highway under similar conditions, the contractor proposes to be able to shore up this area without driving sheet piling and thereby avoiding creating unnecessary and possibly damaging ground level vibrations. Most important relative to implementing this method, the Rayner Group proposes to meet with the homeowners of any property within 200 feet of the pile driving operations to inspect the foundations and associated structures in order to ascertain their condition prior to the onset of construction. It was pointed out by the homeowner at 246 that during the construction of the plotted A home directly to the east of 250 Old Montauk Highway, that their house shook and that an outside glass tabletop was shattered. In answering those concerns, it was stated by Mr. Lorenz that all pile driving to be done at 250 Old Montauk Highway will be preceded by each hole being pre-drilled to loosen the soil beneath each pile, greatly lessening the impact as the piles are placed. Additionally, a monitoring system to gauge vibration at the base of the foundation is noted on page 16 in section 2.4.4.1 of the construction protocol. That system is to be monitored by someone other than the contractor, and it states that failure of the contractor to properly respond and address the on-site conditions that would result in the monitor notifying the town of East Hampton, which could result in the project being shut down until adjustments or repairs were made. That's an important condition as we move forward if we're going to consider approving this application. In a February 8th, 2022 letter to the board, the Rayner Group expanded their explanation of just how the monitoring system will be established and regulated. It was stated by Mr. Gardiello that the proposed demolition and following construction is to be conducted from the north, proceeding south across the lot with debris and soils exiting to the north onto Old Montauk Highway, and that the access driveway to 242 Old Montauk Highway will not be used for construction purposes. It was additionally stated that the demolition of the existing pool patio, and timber retaining wall will take place from above to the north and will not impact or block the driveway to 242 Old Montauk Highway. These considerations weigh heavily in any decision that the board might make about this application. Whereas to consider whether or not under NRSP standards of 255-5-51, the effort made by the applicant rises to the level that all that can be done to reasonably preserve and protect the environment while proceeding with the proposed project has in fact been done. And that under general standards of 255-5-40 Part D, that the proposed project is compatible and suitable for its location. In considering the NRSP, the easement, upgraded septic, and the proposed site plan weigh in its favor, while the scope of the project and the amount of disturbance to the slope and surrounding properties is still of a concern. And in relation to the issue of compatibility and concern for the adjoining properties, I think that the effort that has been made by the applicant and the representative to respond to the board's concerns and to develop and propose techniques that would best protect specifically the interest of the homeowners at 242 and 246 Old Montauk Highway does lean heavily in their favor. So in considering the impact of this project, considering the impact that this project would have on the environment and the two most impacted neighbors, I feel that it is proposed with the stated construction protocols to be closely followed and enforced, that I now consider myself to be willing at this time to approve the request for the issuance of an NRSP for this application. That I find that request for the granting of a height variance to be allowable under these conditions. Would only add that these are difficult decisions for us, and I think we've taken them very seriously. And I think that the concerns of the residents, particularly at 246, have to be addressed and they have to be respected. And I think that the fact that was entered into the record that the proposal by the construction company and the team that's been put together to accomplish this project puts them on the spot, that this monitoring system should be put in place, and that the owner of 246 should have a certain confidence level that this project can move forward, and with the hope that the minimum amount of damage would be done to any of their properties in either case. So with all of that, after a long two-hearing review of this project, one in October and one in January, I am willing at this point to accept approve the application. Would like to go next.
I'll go.
Thank you.
I'd like to say well done. I'm not sure I can add anything of significance that you didn't touch on. I would make one very minor correction. The survey date, I believe, is January 6th, and I think you said January 7th, but that is minor. As respects to all the facts that you provided and sort of the sequencing of your thinking, I'd just like to say I agree completely. I came to the same conclusion. I think stability and sequencing and protecting the neighborhood are all very important factors. And I think that the planning department and this board did a very good job over the course of two hearings of really getting into the details of that. These are difficult decisions. This is a substantial scenic easement. I think almost 0.6 of an acre of the property will be preserved as an easement, and it will match up with the property immediately to the east. I'm in agreement with the importance with regard to the letter from the Rayner Group outlining the monitoring of the vibration issues and the construction protocol. So overall, I came to the same conclusion, which is that I do believe this rises to the level of the NRSP, and secondarily, the grant of the variance. I believe it meets the standards on that as well. So that's it for me.
Thank you.
Me? Okay.
Everyone was looking at you.
Everybody was looking at me.
Everybody's staring.
And I was looking at something else. Okay. Well, this was a tough one for me, and probably made my decision after the last submission by the Rayner Group. Again, much of the concern that I had up until that, which is February 8th, which we received on February 14th to give more data and talking about the monitoring system that was being put into place. There was a lot of discussion at the hearing back on January 25th. Then I was concerned, Mr. Gordiello, they talking about this monitoring system, and he said he had no previous experience with it. But looking at the submission that they gave us and the monitoring, the software that they're intended to use, it could certainly have the capabilities of basically real-time monitoring, and with the vibrations, to protect the homeowner and the home at 246 Old Montauk Highway. One caveat I guess I have is this is a product that's an hardware and software and real-time monitoring. So it is absolutely critical that aside from the product, the micromate product as advertised by the vendor gets set up in the way that it says it can be set up, and that the real-time monitoring is absolutely critical, which includes, network, battery, all those pieces of it. But it looks like they have covered much of this. It's the one thing that I guess changed my mind on this application, because Mr. Perlman did put out a very good letter, and his representative, Don Tarbett, that was representing them. But I think even if the hearing and talking about some of these other items, that they too feel that at least every effort will be made to minimize or not have any damage at all to the home at 246, and also avoid any damage to the driveway for 242. And the scenic easement, 28,071, that's 0.6? Okay, so I'm good with that. There was discussion of a walkway, and I'm not sure about what we're doing there. Walkway that was mostly going to be not on this property. So I don't know if we're going to allow for a walkway on this one.
The vast majority of that walkway is on the other property.
Yeah, I know, but I don't
Probably
know what good it does on this
95% of it.
property.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as far as I'm concerned, we don't have to give them the walkway.
Were you asking us not to allow for the walkway?
Well,
You're
this
gonna-
little
you're gonna
snippet, this
condition
walkway,
Your approval,
am I conditioning my approval on that?
I'm asking.
Probably not, no. But I don't know where it's gonna go, I mean, whatever. I think it was a discussion that maybe didn't get resolved, but
Okay, thank you.
I'll forego that then. But I will be looking to approve the NRSP.
There you go.
Okay. For me, and I think I read the construction protocol about 15 times. But at the end of the day, for me, it was solely whether this entire project meets the standards for an NRSP. I feel this is a very aggressive project in a sensitive area, having steep grades and severe changes in elevation. I also think there needs to be a higher level of protection for natural features, which in this case is the coastal bluff face and the beaches. The NRSP standards are there to protect bluff beach vegetation and neighboring properties. And the purposes of zoning 255-111, it does address protection of neighborhoods, proper use of land, safety and health. In 255-540, adjacent properties, compatibility, environmental protection are all addressed under our code. And in 255-551, 2 addresses alternative designs entailing buildings or structures and their size. So for me, and I truly respect everyone's opinion, it's just that for me, the mass and size and scope of this project is not in keeping with the NRSP and variance standards. And I just feel that there should be more thought, should be put into a more appropriate level of development on this site. So for these reasons, I don't think it's in keeping with NRSP and various standards, and I deny this application.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Council, is that enough for any clarifications you need from us?
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we can call back in the chair.
Mr. Chairman.
All good.
Sorry. My computer won't work.
Thank you. Our next decision is Deborah DeFino at 26 Flag Avenue, Montauk. Suffolk tax map number 300-031-01-28. The size and location is 9,550 square feet at 26 Flag Avenue in Oceanside in Montauk, lot 77, map number 2730. The description is to construct approximately 693 square feet for first floor and second story additions, an 80 square foot porch addition, a new roof over an existing deck, and an upgraded sanitary system on a parcel of land. The relief sought is a natural resources special permit pursuant to 255-420. The East Hampton Town Code, and 3 variances are required for this application. 2 variances of 4.1 feet are required from 255-430 of the Town Code to construct the proposed additions and porch 95.9 feet from freshwater wetlands where 100 foot setbacks are required. 1 variance of approximately 4.1 feet from 255-1172D of the Town Code is required to allow the proposed addition to exceed the pyramid line by 4.1 feet along the northern lot line and any other relief necessary. B residence AE flood zone, elevation 12, secret class is type 2. Who handled this?
Okay.
Terry,
Yeah.
please.
Okay, this hearing was also on January 25th, and 26 Flag Avenue, recall it's on the corner of Flag. Just before the hearing, there was a resubmission from the applicant's agent, Britton Bistrian, and we got a new survey dated January 4th, 2022. And in this, they cut back the porch and the addition, both of which required the 4.1 foot variance, one on the southern portion and one on the eastern side of the project, the proposed project. They pulled those back to bring them out of variance territory. So the application actually, as it exists today, is for the 1 variance of 4.1 feet for the pyramid on the north side lot line, and an NRSP. We received submissions on January 4th, 2022, a survey dated 12/10/21, a septic plan dated 10/31/21, and a site plan dated 9/1/21, all received on January 4th. So with this, they changed the addition on the south side when they pulled that back it's now a 1-story addition, and it comprises of 72 square feet. The other that remained, the porch and the 2nd-story addition on the north side is actually 313 square feet addition. There are many things on this property. Actually, this applicant has things that are off their property. Initially, also, there was an issue, possible issue with excavation on the IA system that was proposed for the initial project. That was changed also in the update that we received, and now it's a shallow field, eliminating retaining walls that would have been necessary. So it leaves the 4.1 foot pyramid violation, various that would be requested. Initially, I was really very much against that. However, and at the hearing, and it was stated that how this house was built toward the northern side of the property initially, and that kind of restricts today what could be done with this house. because of the proximity of the wetlands across the street, both on the south and the east side. So with that, I do feel that the mitigation of and they did state it as mitigation for the IA system, and the cutback of the additions and getting everything out of the variance territory, except for the pyramid variance. I think in this case, I'm looking to approve this project. I think in this case, the addition of the IA system would be definitely a natural resource benefit to this area. And they're also proposing dry wells on this property. So I think that mitigation satisfies that I am willing to approve the 4.1 foot pyramid variance in this case. There was a letter of support from the homeowner to the immediate north of this property, approving that they were okay with this proposed project. There was a number of things. Well, there was one of the dry wells that had been listed on the property. The one kind of right in the middle and just outside the driveway on this survey, has right where that dry well is where about the only native vegetation I saw on this property exists, 2 shad trees. At the hearing, we brought that up, and the agent did agree that they would save the trees and move that dry well elsewhere on the property. So with all that, I think it does meet the natural resources standard for this project, and I am looking to approve it.
Thank you. Ed? Well, I don't have an awful lot to add because my thinking went pretty much along the same way. When we first looked at this project and first presented to us, my feeling was that it was not something that I could move forward and approve. However, much along the same logic and reasoning that was used by Member Berger, I think that the reduction in size of the property, the IA system, I was particularly interested, as was she, in saving those shads. They're significant and beautiful, and they sit to one side of the property. They do represent a native species there. I think that the planning department's position that this represented just too large an expansion of an existing property was a good one, but I think the reduction on the size, voluntary reduction by the applicant here, and the fact that we have the IA system, and the fact that I think that the house being where it is and the wetlands being where they are, there's very little you could do here without having to have these considerations. I don't think it's a particularly big ask in the end. And so I'm willing to approve this, as did Member Berger. I do think it rises to the standards that with the additions that we have that may be a negative in terms of with the environmental impact, I think the plus of having both reduced the original ask, but particularly the IA system convinces me that it will rise to the standards, and I'm willing to approve it at this time.
Thank you. Denise?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to actually applaud the agent for going back to the drawing board and trying to reduce the project while still trying to accommodate the client with just a little bit of additional space. It's nice to see somebody working with us and cooperating in that way. Since the TAM, they have eliminated 2 wetland variances. The porch was also trimmed back to not require a variance. The neighbor most affected sent letters of support. For me, the special circumstance with the pyramid variance, which I need to have in order to grant, with the house having 2 front yards, the house was pinched up against the northern properties line, preventing a second story without asking for a permit. And in redesigning the septic system, they were able to get rid of retaining walls. And both wetlands that impact this property are across paved roads. And then there's town-owned property. Member Brenneman did note that the neighborhood originally existed with small cottages and beach houses. So I visited the site and I drove around the neighborhood, and I believe it's a very mixed type of environment in this area. And for these reasons, I approve this application for an NRSP and the variances being requested.
There's only one right now, right? One you.
What?
One variance.
One variance.
Yes.
The pyramid.
Just
Pyramid, yeah.
great. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, I'm going to ultimately agree with my fellow board members. I will say this was more challenging for me. I felt like, some of the things like the clearing is maxed out.
Yep.
We're approaching a max situation on coverage, total coverage. And so, and we also know this part of town, sometimes changes that we authorize can have unintended consequences. So I'm always especially concerned about ditch plains and the way water is flowing and so forth. But I did note that the wetlands that we're concerned about is across a paved road. To me, that was an important consideration. Certainly, the improvement of the septic is significant. And so while it was, to me, maybe closer, I do ultimately agree that given the mitigation and the circumstances here, that it does meet the standard for NRSP because of the applicant reducing the overall size. And I agree with Member Savaries on the mitigating circumstance relative to the pyramid and that being 2 front yard lot lines. So ultimately, I'm in agreement with the approval.
Thank you. I too will agree with my fellow board members. And I think with the pullback of this project, I feel confident we are approving the minimal variance necessary for this project. So I do go along with that.
There's one thing I want to bring up that we keep bringing up before. This applicant has these PVC fences that are about 20 feet away from their property line, and it's disturbing to me. And we've had discussions in the past about referring something to enforcement. I'm not sure who we could refer this to, but they have these PVC fences that are probably 60 feet away from those wetlands. But they're off the property, so it's nothing we can, I guess, order them to do.
You're talking about the
PVC fences.
Oh, I see.
They have like 4.
Basically in the right of way.
They are in the right of way, and they're about, if you could see on the survey, they're like.
So I think the way we've handled this before is maybe the applicant needs to have a letter in the file by the town engineer or the town building or the town highway saying that they accept this. Otherwise, they would have to move it. And maybe that's a condition of the CFO. Are you okay with that?
I'd rather have them go away.
The superintendent of highway.
I don't know.
We couldn't reach out to the superintendent of highways.
He may make that determination if we alert him. I don't know.
I mean, can we refer it to him to make a decision on that?
No, you can't.
We can't.
Your jurisdiction is appellate only.
So anything that's off a property is just too bad to say,
That's right.
even though it's closer
That's right.
to a wetland?
Your jurisdiction ends at the property line. I know, but that's how it goes.
Yeah, work on that.
It's life.
Well, can we require that they get a letter from the highway department?
I'm not sure if we can condition it if we don't have jurisdiction.
I don't.
Well, Britton did bring it up at the hearing.
Look into it for you, but I think that exceeds your jurisdiction.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with Member Berger that
Right.
Yeah, well, no, it's
sort of
always a dilemma.
sitting
when
out
there's
there,
something-
and it is closer to the wetland than the other improvements that we're approving. But, I don't know the mechanism exactly.
But I would think we can condition it because Britton did mention going to the
During the
highway
hearing.
department during the hearing. So can we?
I can go back and look at the
Yeah,
transcript.
she did.
If legally we can, we would request that be.
Everything's wrong. It's out of character. It's a small place. It shouldn't be there, but
Yeah.
I don't know if we have any jurisdiction.
Right, thank you.
I lost my schedule now.
You want to share?
I taped
we
it
are.
to something again. Oh, okay.
We'll move on to other decisions right now. We have Stephen and Fiona Silver at 60 Seabreeze Lane in Amagansett. And we have a request to keep the record open until May 10th from the applicant.
I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with that too.
Me too.
Everybody okay?
Okay.
Do we need a motion, council?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Okay.
It's my area, right?
Yes.
All right, so in the matter of Stephen and Fiona Silver at 60 Seabreeze Lane in Amagansett, I make Suffolk County Tax Map 300-175-7-28. I make a motion to keep the written record open until May 10th, 2022.
I'll second it.
I concur. And actually, I had handled that one. I forgot about that. But thank you.
You're welcome.
I concur.
I concur as well. Thank you. All right. Terry, you can handle next then if you.
What's the next one?
The minutes approval.
The minutes. Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. Now, for the minutes of April 12th, 2022, for the East Hampton Town Zoning Board of Appeals, I make a motion to approve those minutes.
I second.
I concur.
I concur.
I concur too. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to resolutions. We have first Kevin McDermott at 3 Merrills Road, Amagansett. Council?
Yep. So last week I distributed to you a draft of this determination for Kevin McDermott. This was an application to construct a 160 square foot screened porch and allow decking and a hot tub to remain within side yard setbacks and outside the town's pyramid regulations. It's looking for 3 variances from dimensional regulations and 1 pyramid variance. As you see in the determination, that reflects 3 in favor, 1 dissenting, and 1 abstaining. We do have 1 denial because I believe this is the application where the decking was proposed as being 5.8 from the side yard lot line when it's actually currently 5.6. And that would require a greater variance than the 2.2 requested. So that's the portion that has been denied. And with that, I would ask that the board move to adopt the determination as drafted.
Thank you.
So that part got denied.
That
and
part
I
got
denied the
denied,
whole
yeah.
thing. Yeah, okay.
I'll make a motion then in the matter of Kevin McDermott, 3 Merrills Road, Amagansett, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-84-3-18 to approve the resolution as written. Determination as written.
Yes. Adopt. Is it adopted?
Adopt.
Move to adopt
I'll second that.
determination.
I'll second it.
I concur.
I concur.
All of
concur
the
as well.
above.
Next, we have Mohammed Grima at 425 Cranberry Hill Road in Amagansett. Council?
So as you know, this was a determination that is denying a natural resources special permit pursuant to 255-4-20 of the town code. In this application, we had 3 concurring on the denial and 2 dissenting, based basically on the scope of the project. And this draft was also submitted to the board last week for review. And without getting any comments or edits back, I asked the board to adopt this determination as drafted.
I think that's me.
You.
Yeah. Okay, in the matter of Mohammed Grima at 425 Cranberry Hill Road in Amagansett, Suffolk County Tax Map Number 128-1-32.1, I make a motion to adopt the determination as written.
Second that.
I concur.
I concur.
I concur as well. With that, I'm going to ask for a motion for the vice chair to go to adjourn the meeting for tonight, but we go into executive session to discuss legal matters.
Okay. With that in mind, then I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the Town of East Hampton's Zoning Board of Appeals public hearing and work session for April 19th, 2022. By the way, at 8:58 PM.
Second?
Second, but to move into
Okay,
executive.
I didn't know it was going to be part of it. Okay.
Okay.
And then to move into executive section immediately after.
I'll second that.
I'll concur.
I'll concur.
I concur as well.
Wanted to
Thank you.
second that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.